Hello, and welcome to our session, FDA Import Compliance Issues in the Food Industry. I'm Alice Ancona, Senior VP and COO of the World Trade Center Miami. The World Trade Center Miami is the organizer of the America's Food and Beverage Show. For those of you attending this session, please type your questions onto the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Please note that the conference sessions will be posted next week on americasfoodandbeverage.com website, so please be sure to check in later. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Domenic Veneziano, FDA Regulatory and Strategic Consultant to Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg. Domenic, the show is yours.
Alex, thank you. Alice, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here to talk a little bit about food compliance. We have a lot of slides to go through, and just want to welcome your questions at the end of them. And hopefully you'll get a lot out of this presentation in terms of food compliance and where I think we're going to go. A little bit about me. I started with the Food and Drug Administration back in 1992. I spent several years as an investigator. In 2003, I was asked to open up the first office for terrorism related to the Bioterrorism Act, and moved to the headquarters in Washington area to do that. In 2005, I took on FDA's import operations as the director of that office, overseeing all of the products that were imported into the United States that FDA regulated, and had a hand in writing a lot of the regulations associated with the Food Safety Modernization Act, such as the Foreign Supply Verification Program, the Voluntary Qualified Importer Program, and was a advisor to the other aspects of FSMA as it relates to the imports and making sure that they all aligned with each other. So very quick overview of myself, but today we're going to talk a little bit about the food registration. And the reason why I put food registration in there is because of the biannual requirements. So I just wanted to touch on that to make sure everyone was up to speed and up to date with their registration requirements. We'll talk a little bit about adulteration and misbranding and the importance of them, as well as FSMA. We'll talk about inspections of FSVP, the preventive controls for human foods, and the new proposed food traceability rule that's been published, proposed rule that's been published, and very briefly about that. But as part of that, I'm going to talk about what an inspection is like, and how do you prepare for an inspection, and what FDA is going to do as part of their inspection process. And then finally, we're going to close out talking about detention without physical exam, or import alerts, as most people know them. So the food facility registration, as many of you know, this was part of the Bioterrorism Act of 2002, and then FSMA came along and amended that under Section 415. But who should register? Domestic and foreign facilities that is engaged in manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding of food for human or animal consumptions in the United States. Domestic facilities must register even if their food doesn't enter interstate commerce. So if you're manufacturing a food and you're only exporting it, you still are required to register with the Food and Drug Administration. When should you register? If you are required to register with FDA, you must register before your facility begins manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding operations. And as I mentioned, it's a biannual registration that's conducted every even year. So from October 1st of 2020 through December 31st of 2020 is when you have to renew your registrations. Obviously, if you're not registered and you're going to register next year, you can do that as well. But to renew, you need to make sure that you do it between now and December 31st. The importance of that is it will expire. And if your registration expires, you will not be able to import products into the United States, because that's one of the things they'll be looking for, and it will get flagged by FDA systems, and the product will get detained until you overcome that appearance of the violation, which is the lack of registration. So very important to make sure that you are in updated your facility registrations if you haven't done that yet. The top 5 compliance issues historically have always been microbiological hazards, pesticide residues, misuse of food additives, chemical contaminants, including biological toxins and allergens. All of them, except for the allergen ones, are adulterations. Food additives can be misbranding charges, depending upon if it's in your labeling. And when I talk about labeling, I talk about not only labeling, but your website as well as advertisements. So a little bit of understanding in terms of what it actually means. But if you look at section 402 of the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, if it bears or contains any poisonous or deleterious substance which may render it injurious to health. That's the majority of the charges that they use when they find something violative associated with an adulteration, whether it's salmonella or whether it's a microbiological hazard. That's the charge that gets implemented in terms of that. If it bears or contains a pesticide, so obviously pretty straightforward. Pesticides, there are only certain residues that are allowed. And if it's found to contain something that is not, has any tolerance on it, and it's above that tolerance, that's the charge that they would use related to that. The other one is if it has been prepared or packed in sanitary condition. Wanted to bring that up because that has to do with GMP violations. So if there is filled or held in unsanitary conditions, it's a lot harder to come into compliance than maybe another than one of the other charges. And when I say that, I mean if you're importing a product into the United States and you're on an import alert for GMP issues, it's hard to overcome that. In order to do it, you have to have an inspection and demonstrate that your facility is back in compliance before that product is allowed in. Whereas on the other aspects of it, you can test that product. So once it gets detained without physical exam, you can test it. If you overcome the appearance of the violation, whether it be Salmonella, E. coli, or any other aspect of it, then it would be allowed in, even though it has that appearance of the violation. The other one for seafood companies, number 3 here talks about filth and decomposition. Decomposition is a very big issue, especially this year. For some reason, there's been a lot of cases related to decomp and a lot of people concerned about overcoming that appearance. And it's very hard to do. I've had clients come to us asking about how is that conducted and whether we can challenge it. And it's all based upon sensory. So FDA investigators get trained on how to do sensory testing. And as a result of that, once they find a positive, it goes for confirmatory testing. And the confirmatory testing has to be only 2 out of 18, whether it's histamine or it's conducted by another trained investigator on sensory, but it's hard to overcome that process or hard to challenge it in terms of testimony to overcome it. So it's important to understand what these laws are and what it means and how to get over them in terms of getting products into the country or coming into compliance. These are also other charges within 402. They're not very often used, but I wanted to just make sure that you were aware of them. And again, these aren't all inclusive, and you can see all of the laws associated with adulteration under 402 of the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. Looking at misbranding, the false or misleading, if its labeling is false or misleading in any particular, or in the case of a food to which section 411 applies, its advertisement is false or misleading in a material respect to its labeling, is in violation of section 411B2. As I mentioned, labeling goes beyond just the product itself and what the package says. It's up to, it includes your website and any advertisements that get issued or publicized. So FDA does have task force that take a look at websites and see if there's claims being made, and as a result can issue warning letters directly to companies that are making claims on their websites in terms of anything that might be misleading or may end up being a drug, if you will, or making health claims that are inappropriate. A lot of this has to do with the additive issues. So the additive issues, they'll look at it. There's a couple that I've been working with recently that has to deal with how the food additives are being identified on the labeling. A lot of people send products into Europe and to other countries, and their requirement is to include a color index number, for instance. Well, that color index number has to be done with the actual name for the US standards. And that name actually has to come before the CI index. It's a small issue, but unfortunately, FDA is looking at that and they will hold the product for a simple reason, just as that. We'll take a little look at the Food Safety Modernization Act and the inspectional process. There's a number of types of inspections or examinations, and I just want to run through them a little bit. There's a routine inspection of regulated facilities, and you see two columns here. You see facility and type inspections as well as product examinations. The reason why I do that is because there's two different types of terminology that FDA uses. When they go into a facility and they inspect in a facility, that's called an inspection. When they look at imported products coming in, those are called examinations. The facility side can be a routine inspection, which is, and for foods, they have to do so many based upon what the work plan is, but FSMA kind of changed the way they do it. So every 3 years for high risk products, every 5 years for non-risk products. For cause inspections, if there's an issue, if there's an outbreak, or if there's some kind of specific problem that FDA wants to address, they will issue an assignment to the field to go out and conduct an inspection specifically to that issue that they're trying to address. A GMP or preventive control inspection, more of a routine. It can be a routine or it can be for cause, but when they go out there, they're going to follow a compliance program on how to do that type of inspection specifically. So whether it's a seafood inspection or whether it's a straight GMP inspection, there's a compliance program that directs the investigators on how to do that type of inspection and what should be covered during that inspection. So if you're not aware of compliance programs, you really should, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the inspectional process. Warehouse inspections, if you're a facility that only holds food, FDA will still go in there, and you still have to comply with the GMPs associated with a warehouse and how you control, how you receive product, making sure you have procedures on how you're receiving it, and then how it's being distributed, as well as how it's being stored. And then obviously there's the foreign supply verification program inspections, more on the import side, but it is being handled as an inspection in terms of the process. So when we created the foreign supply verification program, we wanted to include being more preventive. And the way to do that is to hold the importers responsible for ensuring that the products that are coming into the country are compliant with the regulations and being manufactured in the same manner that they are domestically. So the agency will be going out and doing those type of inspections, and we'll talk a little bit about them as well. Product examinations, when FDA wants to collect a sample or they want to examine products during the import side, there's a couple of things that they can do. They go out there and they do what they call a reconciliation exam. They'll take a look at what's on the entry information, and they'll verify that that's the exact same thing that's coming in that's been purported to them on screen. They can do a label examination, take a look at the product, look at its labeling, and do a field exam based upon the labeling in there. They'll collect the sample, and they may do multiple things. They may do a label exam as well as collect the sample, send it to a laboratory for microbiological testing. And obviously that goes to the laboratory for sample analysis, as well as they can have the ability, as we talked about, related to decomp, sensory testing. The other thing I did want to talk about in terms of the facility type inspections, obviously due to COVID-19, they have done a lot more remote inspections. So a remote inspection, they'll send an email to a company asking for a list of procedures. Those list of procedures they will look at, and they will determine whether Based upon that review, you're in compliance or out and not in compliance, and can have the ability to issue warning letters or untitled letters based upon those findings. So let's talk a little bit about the inspectional process. You see that in the red aspect of it, it's FDA. What's FDA going to do before they can come out there? And then below it is, what should a facility do? What kind of preparation? So in terms of FDA pre-inspectional work, they're going to know what the reason for the inspection or the investigation is. Obviously, they get an assignment. They know if it's routine. They know if it's going to be an outbreak investigation, or if it's one of an assignment that they're looking for specific information when they go in there. They'll look at what is the history of the company. So they'll look at the file that's created for each firm and determine whether the firm has been inspected in the past. Are there violations in the past? What was promised in terms of correction? And one of the first things that they'll do is they'll verify that any of those violations have been corrected by the firm. And if they haven't, it's identified as a recidivist violation. And that holds higher weight than a new observation, because you promised corrections, you didn't do those corrections, and therefore the problem still existed from last time. They'll look at the importation history. If they're doing their process right, they'll know how many shipments have come in. They'll know what your history is. I know when I was an investigator back in the early 90s, the one thing I didn't do was just that. I only focused on the facility and doing the GMP inspections without kind of looking at where the product came from, and verifying that the product was kind of coming in and it was compliant early on. I think the investigators are doing a better job now in terms of understanding the importation history of a company when they go in there and determine whether something has been recalled or it had issues in the past. They're also going to review the FD&C Act, the Federal Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act. They'll look at the regulations. They'll look at the compliance programs. As I talked about before, the compliance program actually tells them how to conduct the inspection, the overview of it, how to collect the sample, or what samples should be collected during an inspection and when it's possible. And they'll look at the compliance policy as well. So what kind of violations is the agency going to hold? What kind of enforcement policies, or enforcement discretions, if any? And what should the facility do? So do you have a strategy procedure for how to handle FDA during an inspection? Has your staff been trained? Because when FDA comes in and they issue the 482, they're going to ask for the most responsible person. And if the most responsible person isn't there, it's the next person in line. So is your receptionist, are they prepared? Do they know what to do? Do they know to make them comfortable, to who to get in case FDA does show up? Are your records organized and easily accessible? One of the things you don't want to do is you don't want FDA to roam around your facility. You want to be prepared in terms of making sure that they're in a location where you can bring them documentations for their review. I hated sitting in a conference room. I would go out and I would talk to the staff. I would ask them, since they're the ones that perform the functions, I would ask them questions and try to understand what their process was and make sure that they were following the procedures that have been developed. And are you familiar with the compliance program? Again, FDA is going to enter, they're going to issue credentials, and they're going to issue you a 482 to the most responsible individual. They're going to carry out the inspection, and they should provide you an update every day about what they're observing and what observations they're finding. And at the end of it, if there are observations, they're going to issue a 483 to close out the inspection. How do you react to that? Do you let them write in, or you make them wait until you're there? What is the responsible individuals are out? Who is the next in line to receive FDA? How do you react when the investigator documents a violation or points out a problem? I think it's very important to understand which ones can be corrected immediately and which ones can't. So just because a procedure might be inadequate, changing that procedure doesn't make it effective. You have to retrain personnel. You have to implement it. You have to have document controls and obsolete old procedures and implement new procedures. So you have to determine which ones can be fixed quickly before they leave. And that's an advantage, because if you make a change, you can address it, and maybe they would leave it off the 483, or at least document it in their report that the correction has been fixed. And should you question, I think you should question any findings that they have, to understand what the law is and make sure that you have it correctly. So once they leave, the investigator is going to write a report and provide recommendations on the classification. Is it going to be OAI, official action indicated? Could it result in a warning letter, an import alert, an untitled letter, or a recall? They're going to make that recommendation. There's also VAI and NAI. VAI is a voluntary action indicated. NAI means no action indicated. Everyone strives to have NAI inspections, obviously. The supervisor will review and endorse the investigator's recommendation, or they'll change it. If they read the report and the observations and they believe it's significant, they can increase it. Or if they think the investigators are overzealous on it, they can reduce that to a lower charge. If it's an OAI inspection, it will go to a compliance officer for final classification and issuance of any judicial action. So if they would issue the warning letter, they would make the recommendation of an import alert and make the recommendation to the Division of Import Operations, where they would place that product on detention without physical exam and then put the firm on import alert. What's your responsibility as a facility? You should respond to the observations. Correct the observations that are easy to fix, like I explained. Document the corrective actions and submit a response. Usually you have 15 days to respond to the corrective actions. That is very important, because a compliance officer will review that response. And if you document the fact that you made changes, they can reduce that recommendation from an OAI to a VAI. Document the inspection, discuss the inspection with your staff. Staff should know what the findings were and know where to improve. And then if you have an idea that there was a lot of observations and the investigator had concerns, you should be prepared for the compliance consequences. So is there going to be a warning letter? What's that going to mean? Is it going to result in imported products being held up? What's that going to mean? And what's the cost associated with getting products into the country and to your customers? So FSMA is implemented. The effects of FSMA. FSMA was established to shift the paradigm from a reactive mode to being more preventive. So it placed the responsibility on the industry to implement food safety standards during the manufacturing process, and requires importers to ensure that the products imported are not adulterated or misbranded, and were manufactured in accordance with appropriate regulations. The impact to FDA, the agency should be moving its focus from sampling and examination to inspections. They should be redirecting their resources from sample collections and examinations to inspections, both domestic and foreign. The goal when I was there was to switch that paradigm and to reduce the number of examinations where that's more of a reactive aspect. You collect the sample, you find out if it's violative, and then you make a reaction. It's more of like a catch and release type of issue. Whereas with FSMA now, the foreign supply verification program, the importers have to verify that the products are in compliance. And by doing inspections of the importers, it can lead to other aspects, whether it's increased enforcement through inspection process and triaging in terms of doing inspections of the suppliers or doing inspection of the consignees. But it does lead to more issues associated with how to handle products coming into the country, as well as where inspections should be focused. So let's take a look a little bit at the FSVP program, what it is. Overall, when FDA does an inspection, they're going to be looking at a couple of aspects, and it really depends upon the supply chain or the flow of product coming in. First of all, you have to have a foreign supply verification program for each product from each supplier. Very important. So if you're importing multiple products, you have to have a program for each one of those products, even if it's from the same supplier. They're going to be looking at a number of things: the compliance status review and a product and of the product and the supplier. So they want to know, first of all, did you verify that the product has issues? What are those issues and what are the hazards associated with that product? And what's the status of your supplier? Are they on import alert? Have they had inspections in the past, and have those inspections been violative or not? And what have you done as a result of that compliance status review? They're going to look at the hazard analysis. They want to know, did you evaluate the hazard plan that was in place, and have you addressed all the hazards that have been found in that compliance review for that product, and have they implement preventive controls to minimize those hazards? Based upon the compliance review and the hazard analysis that was done, did you evaluate the hazard analysis and the procedures of those suppliers, and did you approve them? Did you find them adequate to officially say, yes, we have confidence in the supplier, and approve them? And that all has to be documented. They're also going to take a look at the verification activities. So you have to set up a frequency where you're verifying that the hazards have been addressed, whether that's through sampling the product, or whether it's doing an audit of that supplier on a yearly basis or a biannual basis. Whatever that frequency is, and whatever those hazards or verification activities that you want to employ, you have to document the fact that it's been done and that the hazards have been minimized. They're also going to take a look at corrective actions. So FDA understands that there are going to be issues that arise at times. The big issue, or the big question, is, how do you address those issues when they do arise? What kind of corrective actions have you put in place once you find out that there is an issue? Obviously, you have to do a reassessment of FSVP. You should do it every time there is a concern. So every time there's a corrective action, or every time that you find a concern with a product or your supplier, that reassessment of the FSVP in terms of, is it effective? Should something be changed? And if you don't have any of that, then there is a minimum that you have to do it every 3 years. Importer identification and record keeping, obviously, I think they'll speak for themselves. The importer for FSVP is the person who purchases the product, and there's a definition for that. And obviously, there is record keeping requirements. That's what the FDA is going to be looking for in terms of doing an inspection. They are doing on-site inspections, as well as electronic record review inspections. A lot of remote, and they went strictly with remote inspections due to the COVID issue. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But electronic record review inspection, it's being done through FDA, and it's done through electronic systems. It's going to be done utilizing, obviously, technology, WebExes, Zoom calls, and there's a compliance strategy. So the enforcement has started on them. They have placed companies on import alert. They are issuing warning letters associated with it. But overall, it's a little bit more difficult to do a remote inspection than it is on-site. When we implemented FSVP, we wanted to do 100% on-site inspections. It was determined to do an 80-20 split to see how effective it was. I think what the agency is finding out is that it's a little bit more difficult to do remote inspections. So FDA's assignment amended to include instructions for performing remote FSVP inspections. Again, due to COVID-19, it allows initial reinspection and compliance inspection to be conducted remotely. Allows for on-site inspections where deemed appropriate. So at any time, a remote inspection, it's determined that it should go for an on-site, they can always switch to it. Again, I don't think it's going to be done through until COVID kind of slows down and they start doing more inspections. What they found in terms of pros and cons, the FSVPs are going well. They're doing a lot of them. There's approval to do them inspections for FY21, so it's going to continue moving forward. It provides the same level of public health protection. Again, they're finding them effective in terms of documenting evidence and verifying that importers are in compliance. It's being held to the same standards when conducting on-site inspections. It allows different offices within geographical areas to conduct those inspections. So they can utilize the investigators a lot more across the country, because it doesn't really matter where you are to go do the inspection. So if the importer is in one part of the country, you can have an investigator actually cover that area without having to travel. They granted more times to comply with the records review. So normally there's a 24-hour turnaround time period. FDA is allowing to expand that to a few more hours, and it allows FDA to have more time to do the records review. On the cons, that's one of the biggest issues that we had in terms of timeframes. To do a remote inspection, when it was developed, it was actually supposed to take less time to do it. I found that very hard to believe, because there are issues associated with it. So what they're finding is it actually takes longer to conduct it, because the time to receive the documentation, when you look at them, you have questions. So you have to make phone calls back and forth to explain what's in the documentation. Some FSVP importers are non-responsive. So instead of just going there and starting the inspection, after a phone call, people aren't getting back to FDA. They're not providing them with the records. Firms have reduced their business hours and staff due to the COVID outbreak. So that has caused some problems. The FSVP records are not readily available, and therefore the need to extend that time to allow for people to provide records when appropriate. Translation of records can take longer. Instead of being there and have a translator there to go through them in oversight, you have to translate those documents into English so that they can be reviewed. It's a challenge to conduct an FDA team inspection. So FDA sometimes brings people in for training purposes or to speed up the process. And it's difficult to do that through a remote inspection. And then obviously, face-to-face is always the best way to do an inspection. It provides, allows you to interact with the person, with the industry. It allows you to explain what the requirements are, and it allows you to have that interaction where someone can explain what the documents mean and to be readily available in case there's any questions. So again, they're using a different multiple types of communication methods to do the work, but it is moving along, and like I said, they are going to continue it in 2021. Preventive controls. When FDA goes out and does an inspection, they're going to be looking at a number of things. Hazard analysis, people, ingredients, and environment. 3 major areas in terms of the hazards that you have to look at. In terms of preventive controls, think of TB12 being from Boston, and Tampa Bay now, but Tom Brady. The acronym PASSER. Process control, allergen controls, sanitation controls, supply chain controls, and recalls are all the requirements of preventive controls and the management aspects of it. So management controls, there has to be procedures for monitoring, corrective actions, procedures, and verification procedures. During the inspection, they're going to cover, an FDA investigator is going to go in and cover these aspects to make sure that they have all been handled. As you know, the part of the Food Safety Modernization Act increased or changed the CGMPs. So they're updated. They got removed from section 110 of 21 CFR of the Code of Federal Regulations and moved to 117. And the preventive controls works in conjunction with the good manufacturing practices and good agricultural practices and good transportation practices. There's prerequisite programs that have to be implemented that FDA will look at: pest controls, personnel, sanitation. Management is responsible for ensuring employees are trained and qualified. And allergens, as I mentioned, is one of the big top 5 compliance issues when it comes to food. So that has been elevated under the preventive controls, and FDA will be looking at labeling and the ingredients to make sure that all allergens have been addressed. To have an effective program, the preventive controls, food safety systems include a food safety plan, a prerequisite program, and the implementation of records. The food safety plan includes hazard analysis, preventive controls, and procedures and monitoring corrective actions, as I talked about earlier. And all of this should be done by a qualified individual who has the experience, training, and expertise to cover that aspect that they're responsible for. A little bit about why it's important in terms of the compliance aspects. So failure to comply with those regulations could result in warning letters. It can result in placement on, again, import alert, or having your products detained without physical examination. It's a prohibited act, as you know. It can also require suspension or revocation of the voluntary qualified importer program. So if you're part of that program and you're in violation of it could warrant a suspension of that until you come back into compliance. It can initiate an inspection of your foreign suppliers. So part of that of the process that FDA is looking at is triaging. So FSMA is kind of done holistically and all works together. So if there's an area that's of concern, FDA will be working with different aspects of the agency to schedule or to look what other areas should be impacted. So if the foreign supplier verification program has problems, it could say, well, you know what, we're not confident that the supplier is in compliance. That could initiate an inspection of that supplier. It could also result in administrative detention or suspension of your food facility registration, which has happened a couple of times over the past couple of years. Obviously, disruption of consumer confidence, financial loss if your products start getting held up or start losing contracts or can't get that product into the country due to violations of the Food Safety Modernization Act. Just wanted to bring up the proposed rule that's out there and make everyone aware that it's there. FDA has come out with this food traceability list, which is on your right. It's number of foods that they consider to be the highest risk, and if you have ingredients that are utilized in these products or you manufacture in these products, then you are going to be required to have greater traceability requirements associated with those products, and they're called key data elements. So there's a number of new terminologies that's going. So if you grow, receive, transform, create, or ship a food on that list, you will have specific records that we will have to maintain to link to the key data elements. An example of a key data element for the growing aspect is the growing area coordinates. So that's one new aspect that you're going to have to document if you're growing fruits and vegetables, is you're going to have a traceability, your lots for traceability. The lot code has to be linked directly to a growing area coordinates. Another example of key data elements has to do with transformation. So looking at the definition of a transformation, it involves changing a food on the list. And in order to do that, you are going to have documentation now that relates to traceability of product identifiers, traceability of product description for the foods used in transformation, the quantity of each traceability, and you can see all the other examples that are there. Finally, we talk very quickly about detention without physical exam and import alerts. Products are detained without physical exam based on supporting evidence that future shipments will be violated. That's the difference between domestic and imports. In imports, you only need an appearance of a violation. So once they have sufficient evidence, all future shipments have that appearance of a violation, and your products can be detained without physical examination. And products are placed on the import alert because they are subject to detention without physical exam. So people get that a little bit backwards. They think you're on import alert, but in fact, import alerts are only there to notify. It's more of a guidance document for the field to let them know there's sufficient evidence to detain these products without any examination. You can obviously get removed from import alert. You have to submit a petition to FDA, the Division of Import Operation, with documentation showing what you did in terms of a root cause analysis, 5 clean shipments, depending upon what the violations were. And you would get an acknowledgement letter back from FDA. And then it usually takes about 10 to 16 weeks for them to do the review. And if everything goes well, you'll get removed from that import alert, and your products would not be subject to detention without physical exam in the future. So that's my presentation. I hope you found it helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Domenic. That was such a great session, very informative. As our audience knows, all of these sessions are recorded and will be available on our website starting next week. Right now, we don't have any Q&As, and we don't have time for Q&As because we have to hop on to our next session, State of the Ports. But if you do have any questions, please email them at info@worldtrade.org, or you can email them directly to Domenic, as you can see on the screen, and I'm sure he can help you out with that. With that said, Domenic, thank you so much again for participating in America's Food and Beverage Show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.